we don't know if that Mujtaba is actually even alive.
وبالتالي يعني الحرب لم تحقق هدفها.
This regime will slaughter its population just like the Assad regime did to stay in power. This thing's hard to do, to change a regime without boots on the ground.
أليس قاس هذا الكلام على الحكومة؟
I think right now what you're going to have is a prolonged Israeli campaign against Hezbollah. Certainly at the military's last public statement by General Haikal.
أعزائي المشاهدين مرحبا. في بيانه الأول دعا المرشد الجديد للجمهورية الإسلامية إلى مواصلة القتال وتفعيل جبهات أخرى وإغلاق مضيق هرمز، ووعد بالانتقام. فهل هو خطاب لرفع المعنويات أم قرار بالتصعيد؟ دونالد ترامب من جهته قال لقد فزنا. بنيامين نتنياهو قال أيضا إن الحرب حققت أهدافها. فهل يمهد الزعيمان لوقف الحرب أم أننا أمام مرحلة جديدة فيها؟ على خط آخر، إسرائيل تهدد بحرب طويلة في لبنان للقضاء على حزب الله. فما ستكون عليه هذه الحرب؟ وما هو سقفها الزمني؟ وما هي حدودها الجغرافية؟ لمناقشة هذه المواضيع ينضم إلي من واشنطن دايفيد شينكر، المساعد الأسبق لوزير الخارجية الأميركي لشؤون الشرق الأدنى. أهلا فيك دايفيد.
حبيبي.
يعني السؤال الأول، بيان مجتبى خامنئي، كيف تقرأه؟ هل هو تصعيد أم هو فقط لرفع معنويات الشعب الإيراني؟
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, Fadi. Thanks for having me. I think it's predictable. First of all, we don't know if that Mujtaba is actually even alive, or if he himself made this statement. But of course, his father, his wife, his child, his sister were killed. I would expect a really aggressive and type of answer. And I think it's not surprising, threatening revenge, threatening the Gulf neighbors, threatening to persist in closing or harassing shipments of energy moving through the Persian Gulf. None of this is surprising. The fact is that before Ali Khamenei was killed, the power behind the throne was the IRGC, with Mujtaba, who is not even an Ayatollah, is not qualified for the position, is a hereditary ruler now of Iran. The IRGC has even more power. And so this is the kind of statement I would expect from Khamenei, and really geared toward domestic consumption.
يعني تقول وكأنك تقول أن مجتبى لن يكون الحاكم الفعلي لإيران، إنما الحرس الثوري.
I think that's the case. I think, we've had regime change. Before it was nominally Ali Khamenei. Mujtaba is going to have, I think, even less authority than the IRGC. Their power increases by the leadership change. So I think they are really the key driver in Iranian politics these days.
لا شك أنه اختيار مجتبى خامنئي بدأ وكأنه تحدي، خاصة للإدارة الأمريكية وتحديدا للرئيس ترامب الذي حذر من اختيار مجتبى. ألا يؤثر ذلك على أن النظام في إيران لا يزال قوي ومتماسك؟
Well, first, let me say that I don't think that the Mujtaba came through a vote of the Expediency Council or the traditional Council of Guardians voting on his candidacy. I think this was the choice of the IRGC. That said, we've not seen to date in Iran fissures in the IRGC, in the Basij, in the Artesh. We've not seen soldiers, the members of the regime fearing for their lives and defecting. I think this regime is damaged, but still coherent and coalescing. and has a grip on power, still in control. And while regrettable, I think after the 12-day war, I think the regime made plans, a lot of contingency plans for succession, going down beyond the highest levels of government, reaching down several levels that have enabled them to, weather the storm of extreme losses in the ranks of the regime.
يعني تقول أن النظام لا يزال قويا، وبالتالي يعني الحرب لم تحقق هدفها، أقله من الجهة الأمريكية وبطبيعة الحال من الجانب الإسرائيلي.
Well, so we'll separate here. I don't think the regime is strong. I think the regime persists. It's experienced a huge amount of damage. The conventional military, the stocks of missiles, but they still possess, for the time being, this 450 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that's buried in a mountain, but they eventually will have access to enough for 10 nuclear bombs if they somehow are able to reconstitute the program. But the regime holds power now. While not strong, they have still have capabilities that put enormous pressure on the Gulf and on the world by strangling the free movement of energy through the Straits of Hormuz. So did Israel or the United States achieve their goals? I think the United States, the president, didn't, really describe what the objective of the war was beforehand. In fact, we had many objectives. So the first one he announced was regime change. But then he said he would be happy with leadership change along the Venezuela model. Then we had degradation of the missile program. We had as an objective the setting back of Iran's ability to construct nuclear weapons or build nuclear weapons. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff defined it very differently. He said it was the harming or impacting Iran's ability to project power outside the borders of the state. And clearly that is still not achieved. And whether it can be achieved purely from the air in the next week or so, I think is really an open question.
يعني هل تعتقد أنه الأسبوع المقبل وخاصة ممكن كما قال ترامب وأيضا وزير الدفاع سيكون أسبوعا قاسيا على إيران، ممكن أن يسقط هذا الصمود أو يكسر هذا الصمود للنظام الإيراني؟
Allahu alam. I really don't know whether that's going to be possible. Until now, there has been, I think the United States has held back quite a bit. You've seen Iran target, not only the American partners in the Gulf and Israel, but also Turkey, also Azerbaijan. We've seen Hezbollah target Cyprus, a NATO partner, as well. And so, but they've hit, I think, importantly, key energy infrastructure in the Gulf. And until now, the United States and Israel really haven't touched Iran's energy infrastructure. I think, this is essentially playing a game of chicken here. This would certainly have an even greater impact on Iran. But I'm not sure that's a route that the United States or Israel will take, but we'll see what happens in the coming week.
ولكن قالوا أنه في المرحلة المقبلة وبدأ أيضا من قصف هذا الأسبوع الحالي قصف استهداف منشآت اقتصادية ونفطية في إيران، إضافة وقيل أنه أيضا الهدف الحالي والمقبل سيكون البسيج، يعني تدمير القوة القمعية للنظام في الداخل.
Yeah. So We did hear that there could be an energy infrastructure hit. President Trump talked about taking down Iran's electric grid, and then there's other possibilities. We may see a move against Kharj Island, inhibiting any oil exports from Iran. There are wider questions that brings into play, in particular until now, the role of China, which gets a huge amount of oil from the Gulf and from Iran in particular. I think it's an objective to keep them out of the war. But the biggest development, I think, of this week was really Israel starting to target besieged forces on the ground, the checkpoints, going after these forces. It's not enough and not effective to go after the buildings that belong to the besieged. They're not in the buildings. They're out patrolling. They've moved to schools and mosques, but they have checkpoints. And I think the point is to really, for the Israelis to go after and target them with drones, inflict a price on them, help degrade their forces when positioned. Because if you want to topple this regime, which was initially a stated objective of the Trump administration, and certainly is an objective of the government of Israel, then you have to really erode, degrade, and cause fissures in this domestic repressive apparatus, the besieged, but also to some extent the IRGC. And while they've taken out some leadership in these groups, they still persist. And we know from January 8th and 9th, when they killed tens of thousands of Iranian innocent civilian protesters, this regime will slaughter its population just like the Assad regime did to stay in power. So you really have to start targeting these groups. And I think we're on a timeline here, increasingly shorter timeline about how much longer this campaign will last.
وربما يعني استهداف البسيج اليوم هي القوى القمعية للنظام، ربما لخلق ظروف أفضل للمتظاهرين في الداخل الإيراني لقلب النظام، أم لتسليح جماعات داخل إيران للانقضاض على النظام أو لزعزعة النظام من الداخل.
Yeah, I mean,
ما هي معلوماتك؟
Yeah, no, I don't have special information on this. So, I see the reports of arming opposition. We saw reports of arming not only domestic opposition being a possibility, but also the Kurds, the Kurdish opposition that is based in Iraqi Kurdistan. This thing's hard to do to change a regime without boots on the ground. If there is a Trump doctrine, it is no boots on the ground, right? Well, I'm not talking about special forces here. I'm talking about large scale military deployments. And so you're going to need either Kurds, local Iranians, or resumption of mass protests. But people will not go out knowing that this government, this regime will murder them. And so you have to soften it up first. And once again, I mean, all these are, what the thinking seems to be right now. But I don't know if it's going to work. I think it's a long shot. I think the only, case where we had this type of regime change from the air is probably Kosovo. And there you had other forces, on the ground, and it took a year or two after the Allied bombing.
هناك معلومات تقول أنه محتمل أن تقوم الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بإنزال بري في جزيرة خرج للسيطرة عليها. هل من معلومات لديك حول هذا
الموضوع؟
I
mean, that's what I've heard. I mentioned that a minute ago, that the Trump administration does not want to permanently or damage for the long term Iran's energy infrastructure. It doesn't want global oil prices to go up. They're a significant supplier. And this could, promote even or provoke even a stronger response of Iran against key, energy infrastructure in the region, in addition to the closing or restricting movement through Straits of Hormuz. So one idea that is out there is to, seize Karg Island, and this is, the key point of Iranian oil exports. Hard to believe that a country in this day and age would have one, export terminal for the entire supply of its, leading gross national product. But that is the case in Iran. And but this too is not a simple operation. This is within artillery range of mainland Iran. So this too could be fraught.
المرشد الجديد مجتبى طلب إغلاق مضيق هرمز، وترامب وأيضا وزير الدفاع البريطاني اليوم يقترحان مرافقة السفن للتشجيع على الملاحة على العبور في هذا المضيق. سؤال: هل تستطيع أيضا إيران إغلاق المضيق فعليا من
I
بعد
think
التدمير؟ هل
this
هناك
depends. Listen, they have capabilities. They could have mined it. I think they did do some mining. This would certainly pose a challenge. And they still have missile and even anti-tank weapons could hit ships from the Iranian coastline. I am sure that the United States could keep the straits open, could protect ships. But this, of course, is a matter of will and capability and how much effort and risk the Trump administration wants to absorb. But yes, if you make the effort, you can do it. But once again, it could be costly, and American ships and sailors will be in harm's way in a way they haven't been in this war until now. And there's an idea out there, also a proposal to start doing what we did back in the tanker war after Saddam, invaded Kuwait, right? Or even during the Iran-Iraq war, which was, by escorting, U.S. flagged vessels through the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. But once again, the higher level of effort, more risk for U.S. sailors and vessels.
ما يعني أنه أسعار يعني سيبقى هناك أزمة طاقة في العالم، وأسعار الطاقة سترتفع. إلى أي مدى ستتحمل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، إدارة ترامب تحديدا، ارتفاع في أسعار النفط؟ وهل يكون هو السبب ربما لإنهاء الحرب في مرحلة معينة؟
Yeah, I mean, certainly the president at a certain point is going to be sensitive about, the increase of the price per barrel. It's already gone from $60 to over $100 a barrel. We're getting, at some point, U.S. consumers will pay $4 a gallon, which for Europeans wouldn't be much. But for Americans, this is a real impact. And then there is, of course, a downstream impact, which is if fuel costs more, it will cost more to plant and harvest crops. And so the price of wheat and agricultural products will go up, the price of fertilizers will go up, and all this will be passed on to American consumers and indeed consumers around the world. Certainly within the United States, the prices of commodities are high. Americans are feeling for some time now have been complaining about inflation. And so this is a concern. And the president does have midterm elections coming up. Now they're in November, which seems like a long way off. But even if the war ended tomorrow, it would be months for the prices to recover. And then, of course, Iran has a vote about whether it will continue to harass shipping through the Persian Gulf, and the movement of fertilizers and other petroleum-based products. So it's complicated. Ultimately, the president has taken one step, which is to release some reserves from our strategic petroleum reserves. it'll be 1 million barrels per day. But, so many barrels have come off the market. This is really a drop in the ocean. Ultimately, I think this will contribute to the president's thinking about when to wind this war down. But let's remember, I think the president understands that the United States can't leave its Gulf partners at the mercy of a wounded and highly aggressive Iranian regime in the aftermath of this war. So there's a question of ending it, but even more important, how it ends.
ماذا عن الذخائر؟ حكي كثير عن الذخائر، مخزون الذخائر لدى الجيش الأمريكي، وأيضا حكي في الأسبوع الماضي منذ أيام أو أكثر، حكي عن أنه تم استعمال مخزون في آسيا. ماذا عن الذخائر؟ هل ربما تكون عاملا أيضا لوقف الحرب في
Yeah,
مرحلة؟
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been stories written about this in places like the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. The United States has huge supplies of weapons. But when you go to war, you utilize these systems, and they take a long time to replenish. And so during the 12-day war, the United States deployed THAAD missile interceptors to Israel. And during the course of 12 days, the United States shot down hundreds of Iranian missiles, and we used some of these THAADs. The United States utilized something like 20% of its global supply of these anti-missile systems. It will take more than a year to rebuild those interceptors at the current rate of production. So to use them now again in the Gulf, in another war, we have stocks, but we have to take them from somewhere. And we are taking them perhaps from the Asia Pacific theater or from other allies. Tomahawks that we've used, they are great weapons, and they take a long time to build, and they have complicated supply chains. And so this is definitely, and it should be, a concern. We have, the United States has a lot of the less highly technological munitions, perhaps endless supply. We can make them into JDAMs, into smart bombs from dumb bombs. We have the kits, but a lot of these other systems, they're in limited supply. So this may be another reason, because we have obligations elsewhere, particularly in Taiwan and elsewhere around the world.
قبل الانتقال إلى لبنان، أود التوقف معك ديفيد على اجتماع كان لافتا لوزير دفاع باكستان مع وزير دفاع السعودية، والدولتان لديهما اتفاقية دفاع استراتيجي مشترك، والسعودية هي من ضمن دول الخليج المستهدفة من إيران. ما هي معلوماتك؟ هل ربما هذا الاجتماع يمهد لانتقال دول الخليج من الدفاع إلى ربما الهجوم على إيران، أو إلى تفعيل واشتراك باكستان من خلال اتفاقية دفاع؟
I'm not a specialist in Pakistan. What I'd say is that there is this mutual defense treaty. And I don't know whether the Saudis will feel the necessity to activate it. I think a lot of this depends on how long the war continues and the level of damage done to Saudi infrastructure and the civilian casualties. But I think this is something that is of great benefit to Saudi Arabia if things escalate, because this, while Iran feels comfortable attacking the Gulf, it's a bigger problem for them to tangle with Pakistan as well, a nuclear power.
بدي أنتقل معك ديفيد للبنان. كتبت حضرتك بمجلة المجلة مقال تقول فيه أن الحكومة اللبنانية تتنصل من التزاماتها حول نزع سلاح الحزب، فإذ بها تختار الحرب مع إسرائيل. أليس قاس هذا الكلام على الحكومة؟ وهل كانت قادرة الحكومة والجيش بنزع سلاح الحزب؟
Listen, it's difficult. I know that there's a threat from Hezbollah of civil war, basically a threat that Hezbollah will attack the Lebanese government and attack the Lebanese armed forces if it moves to take away the weapons. I know this is difficult. I think the military has to go in phases, but I think both the government and the military are to blame here. You know, they spent a great deal of time trying to negotiate or come to a consensus with Hezbollah, which essentially is an arm of the IRGC. They are more loyal to Khamenei than they are to the state of Lebanon. They brought Lebanon into another war in the service of Iran. And so, you know, the choice was clear. And I think, you know, that this was going to be difficult. Lebanon has oftentimes avoided difficult decisions. But this is something that they're going to have to actually make an effort to do if they want to be a sovereign country.
ولكن
If they can't do it, maybe the government should go to the United Nations and ask for a Chapter 7 resolution to seek international support for the disarming.
ولكن اللجوء إلى الفصل السابع كما تقول هل يحل المشكلة؟ هل المجتمع الدولي جاهز من خلال مجلس الأمن للمساعدة الحكومة اللبنانية على التخلص أو على نزع سلاح حزب الله؟
Listen, I think that's, you know, that was a little flippant statement on my part. I think it's more complicated than that. But what I'm saying is that the government of Lebanon really delayed on moving forward with its commitment. The LAF really didn't do a serious job in the south of Lebanon. Reuters was talking about Hezbollah rearming during this period. And ultimately, we've had 16 months where nothing has been accomplished since the ceasefire. And we find ourselves once again with Hezbollah breaking the ceasefire and Lebanon being dragged to another war. So I think, you know, Lebanon was afraid of civil war. And instead of civil war, by not targeting moving forward on this disarming Hezbollah agenda, they now have a war with Israel.
نحن اليوم في حرب حزب الله يسند أطلق الحرب إسناد إيران وردت إسرائيل بحرب بإنهاء الحزب فهل هو قرار نهائي وضوء أخضر أمريكي لإنهاء هذا الحزب للقضاء على حزب الله؟
But listen, I think right now what you're going to have is a prolonged Israeli campaign against Hezbollah. You know, I think that the government of Lebanon looking to get a ceasefire is now willing to talk to Israel directly. That's a good thing. But that's insufficient. You know, I think that it's important to talk with Israel. You know, I don't think you have to talk about peace right now. If you do, that's fine. But I don't think the country's quite ready. But I do think that unless the government and the military is willing to try and exert sovereignty on their own, you know, you need to have boots on the ground here. Israel's not going to be able to disarm Hezbollah entirely from the air. And until you do, Lebanon won't be a successful country. It'll be a country that every couple of years has another really disastrous war. And there will be 850,000 Shiites who are displaced from their homes because Hezbollah decided it was more important to defend Ali Khamenei's honor
آخر
than to
سؤال
have a sovereign country.
آخر سؤال ديفيد هل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ستتخلى عن دعم الجيش؟
I think they're really frustrated right now at the lack of progress, and certainly at the military's last public statement by General Haikal, where he said that his main priority was not disarming Hezbollah, but maintaining national unity and protecting the integrity of the Lebanese armed forces. You know, that's going to be a problem in the long term. The United States has given more than $2 billion to the Lebanese armed forces since the Cedar Revolution, and it's time for them to step up.
Thank you ديفيد شينكر شكرا لهذا الحوار.
شكرا مع السلامة.
الشكر موصول أيضا للأعزائي المشاهدين، ويمكنكم متابعة هذه الحلقة عبر موقع أساس www.asasmedia.com، وعبر كل منصات أساس للتواصل الاجتماعي: يوتيوب، فيسبوك، إكس، إنستغرام وتيك توك. شكرا وإلى اللقاء.